During the night of 6th, the 7th of August 1985 in the village of Tolleshunt, Darcy, Essex, England, United Kingdom, Neville and June Bamber were shot and killed inside their farmhouse at White House Farm, along with their adopted daughter Sheila Caffel and Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons Daniel and Nicholas Caffel.
The only surviving member of the immediate family was their adopted son, Jeremy Bamber, then 24 years old, who said he had been at home a few miles away when the shooting took place.
Police initially believed that Sheila, diagnosed with schizophrenia, had fired the shots, then turned the gun on herself. But weeks after the murders, Jeremy's ex-girlfriend told police that he had implicated himself. The prosecution argued that, motivated by a large inheritance, Bamber had shot the family with his father's semi-automatic rifle, then placed the gun in his unstable sister's hands to make it look like a murder-suicide.
A silencer, the prosecution said, was on the rifle and would have made it too long, they argued, for Sheila's fingers to reach the trigger to shoot herself. Bamber was convicted of 5 counts of murder in October 1986 by a 10-2 majority verdict, sentenced to a minimum of 25 years, and informed in 1994 that he would never be released. The Court of Appeal upheld the verdict in 2002.
Jeremy protested his innocence throughout, although his extended family remained convinced of his guilt. Between 2004 and 2012, his lawyers submitted several unsuccessful applications to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, arguing that the silencer might not have been used during the killings, that the crime scene may have been damaged then reconstructed, that crime scene photographs were taken weeks after the murders, and that the time of Sheila's death had been miscalculated. A key issue was whether Jeremy had received a call from his father that night to say Sheila had gone berserk with a gun. Jeremy said that he did, that he alerted police, and that Sheila fired the final shot while he and the officers were standing outside the house. It became a central plank of the prosecution's case that the father had made no such call, and that the only reason Jeremy would have lied about it, indeed, the only way he could have known about the shootings when he alerted the police, was that he was the killer himself. On Sunday, the 4th of August 1985, 3 days before the murders, Sheila and the boys arrived at White House Farm to spend the week with Neville and June. The housekeeper saw Sheila that day and noticed nothing unusual. 2 farm workers saw her the following day with her children and said she seemed happy. One of the crime scene photographs showed that someone had carved "I hate this place" into the cupboard doors of the bedroom in which the twins were sleeping. Jeremy visited the farm on the evening of Tuesday, the 6th of August. He told the court that during his visit his parents suggested to Sheila that the boys be placed in daytime foster care with a local family. He said Sheila did not seem bothered by the suggestion and had simply said she would rather stay in London. The boys had been in foster care before, although in London rather than near White House Farm, and it had not appeared to cause a problem for Sheila. Ferguson told the Court of Appeal in 2002 that any suggestion that the children be removed from her care would have provoked a strong reaction from Sheila, but that she might have welcomed daytime help. A farm worker heard Jeremy leave around 9:30 p.m. Barbara Wilson, the farm's secretary, telephoned Neville at around that time and was left with the impression that she had interrupted an argument. She said Neville was short with her and seemed to hang up in irritation, something he had never done before. He was, by all accounts, an even-tempered man. June's sister, Pamela Boutflower, telephoned around 10 p.m. She spoke to Sheila, who she said was quiet, then to June, who seemed normal. Jeremy told the court that, hours before the murders on the 6th of August, he had loaded the rifle, thinking he heard rabbits outside, but had not used it. He left the rifle on the kitchen table, with a full magazine and a box of ammunition, before leaving the house, It did not at that point have the silencer or telescopic sight attached, he claimed. Both had been on the rifle in late July, according to a nephew, but Jeremy said his father must have removed them. The prosecution disputed this, maintaining that the silencer was on the rifle when the family was murdered. Neville kept several guns at the farm. He was reportedly careful with them, cleaning them after use and securing them. He had bought the gun, a .22 Anschutz model 525 semi-automatic rifle, on the 30th of November 1984, along with a Parker Hale silencer, telescopic sight, and 500 rounds of ammunition. It used cartridges, which were loaded into a magazine that held 10 rounds. 25 shots were fired during the killing, so if the rifle was fully loaded to begin with, it would have been reloaded at least twice. The court heard that the magazine became harder to load with each cartridge. Loading the 10th was described as exceptionally hard. The rifle had normally been used to shoot rabbits with the silencer and telescopic sight attached. The court heard that the sight had to be removed with a screwdriver, but it was usually left in place because it was time-consuming to realign it. Neville's nephew visited the farmhouse on the weekend of 26, the 28th of July 1985, and told the court that he had seen the rifle in the gun cupboard in the ground floor office, with the sight and silencer attached. He had taken the gun out and used it for target shooting. There were 3 telephones at White House Farm on the night of the shooting, all on the same landline. There was usually a cream rotary phone in the main bedroom on Neville's bedside table, a beige Statesman phone in the kitchen, and a blue Scepter 100 phone in the office on the first floor. There was a 4th phone too, an Envoy cordless phone in the kitchen, but it had been picked up for repair on the 5th of August. The rotary phone had at some point been moved out of the main bedroom and into the kitchen, where the police found it with its receiver off the hook. They found the Statesman phone still in the kitchen, but hidden in a pile of magazines. Jeremy telephoned Chelmsford Police Station, and not the 999 emergency number, from his home in the early hours of the 7th of August, to raise the alarm. He told them he had received a telephone call from his father, from the landline at White House Farm, to the landline at Bamber's home, to say that Sheila had gone berserk with a gun. Jeremy said the line went dead in the middle of the call. The prosecution argued that Jeremy had received no such call, and that his claim to have done so was part of his setting the scene to blame Sheila. Neville was severely bloodied at that point, according to the Court of Appeal, but the telephone had no visible blood on it when police examined the scene, although it was acknowledged that no swabs had been taken. It was Jeremy, the prosecution said, who had left the kitchen telephone off the hook after calling his home from White House Farm to establish that part of his alibi. After Jeremy telephoned the police, a British telecom operator checked the White House Farm line at 3:56 a.m. according to the police log, and at 4:30 a.m. according to the Court of Appeal, and found that the line was open. The operator could hear a dog barking. British Telecom did not at the time keep records of local calls. According to experts who testified at the trial, if Neville had telephoned Jeremy without replacing the receiver, the line between them would have remained open for 1 or 2 minutes. During this time, Jeremy would not have been able to use his telephone. Explaining why he had called a local police station and not 999, Jeremy told police on the night that he had not thought it would make a difference to how soon they would arrive. He said he had spent time looking up the number, and even though his father had asked him to come quickly, he had first telephoned his girlfriend, Julie Mugford, in London, then had driven slowly to the farmhouse. Jeremy acknowledged that he could have called one of the farm workers, but had not considered it. In his early witness statements, Jeremy said he had telephoned the police immediately after receiving his father's call, then telephoned Mugford. During later police interviews, he said he had called Mugford first. Jeremy said he was confused about the sequence of events. After the telephone calls, Jeremy drove to the farmhouse, as did 3 officers from Witham Police Station, who later testified that he had been driving much more slowly than them. They passed him on Pages Lane and arrived at the farmhouse 1 or 2 minutes before him. Jeremy's cousin, Anne Eaton, testified that he was normally a fast driver, 100. The group waited outside the house for a tactical firearms unit to arrive, which turned up at 5 a.m. and decided to wait until daylight before trying to enter. Police determined that all the doors and windows to the house were shut except for the window in the main bedroom on the first floor. Using a loudhailer, they spent 2 hours trying to communicate with Sheila. The only sound they reported from the house was a dog barking. While waiting outside, the police questioned Jeremy, who they said seemed calm. According to the Court of Appeal, Jeremy told them about the phone call from his father, and that it had sounded as though someone had cut off the call. He also said he did not get along with his sister. When asked whether she might have gone berserk with a gun, the police said he replied, "I don't really know. She is a nutter. She's been having treatment." When asked why Neville would have called Jeremy and not the police, he replied that his father was the sort of person who might want to keep things within the family. Jeremy claimed to have called Chelmsford Police Station rather than 999 because he did not think it would affect the police's response time. Over the next few hours, he talked about cars in general with one of the officers, saying that the Osea Road caravan site would be able to stand him a Porsche soon. Jeremy told the police that Sheila was familiar with guns and that they had gone target, shooting together. He said he had been at the farmhouse himself a few hours earlier and that he had loaded the rifle because he thought he had heard rabbits outside. Jeremy had left the rifle on the kitchen table fully loaded, with a box of ammunition nearby. A doctor who was called to the house testified the deaths could have occurred at any time during the night. He said Jeremy appeared to be in a state of shock. He broke down, cried, and seemed to vomit. The doctor said Jeremy told him about the discussion the family had had about possibly placing Sheila's sons in foster care. The police entered the farmhouse at 7:54 a.m., using a sledgehammer to break the back door. The door had been locked from the inside, with the key still in the lock. They found 5 bodies with multiple gunshot wounds, Neville downstairs in the kitchen and the rest upstairs. 25 shots had been fired, mostly at close range. In what order the family was killed is not known. A telephone was lying on one of the kitchen surfaces, with its receiver off the hook, next to empty .22 cartridge cases. The police said chairs and stools were overturned, and there was broken crockery, a broken sugar basin, a broken ceiling light, and what looked like blood on the floor. Neville was found in the kitchen, dressed in pyjamas, lying over an overturned chair next to the fireplace, amid a scene suggestive of a struggle. He had been shot 8 times, 6 times to the head and face, fired when the rifle was a few inches from his skin. The remaining shots to his body had occurred from at least 2 feet away. Based on where the empty cartridge cases were found, 3 in the kitchen and 1 on the stairs, the police concluded that he had been shot 4 times upstairs, but had managed to get downstairs where a struggle took place, and during which he was hit several times with the rifle and shot again, this time fatally. June's body and clothing were heavily bloodstained. She was found in her nightdress with bare feet. The police believe she had been sitting up during part of the attack, based on the pattern of blood on her clothing. She was found lying on the floor by the door of the master bedroom. June had been shot 7 times. 1 shot to her, forehead, between her eyes, was fired from under 1 foot, 30 centimeters, away. That, and another shot to the right side of her head, would both have caused her death quickly, the court heard. There were also shots to the right side of her lower neck, her right forearm, and 2 injuries on the right side of her chest and right knee. The boys were found in their beds in their own room, formerly Sheila's room. They appeared to have been shot while in bed. The court heard that Daniel had been shot 5 times in the back of the head, 4 times with the gun held within 1 foot, 30 centimeters of his head, and once from over 2 feet, 60 centimeters away. Nicholas had been shot 3 times, all contact or close proximity shots. Sheila was found on the floor of the master bedroom with her mother. She was in her nightdress, her feet were bare, and she had 2 bullet wounds under her chin, one of them on her throat. The pathologist, Peter Venezis, said that the lower of the injuries had occurred from 3 inches, 76 mm away, and that the higher one was a contact injury. The higher of the 2 would have killed her immediately. The lower injury would have killed her too, he said, but not necessarily straight away. Venezis testified that ITT would be possible for a person with such an injury to stand up and walk around, but the lack of blood on her nightdress suggested to him that she had not done this. He believed that the lower of her injuries had happened first because it had caused bleeding inside the neck. The court heard that if the immediately fatal wound had happened first, the bleeding would not have occurred to the same extent. The pattern of bloodstains on her nightdress suggested she had been sitting up when she received both injuries, Venezis said. The police and media were initially convinced by the murder-suicide theory. Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Jones, deputy head of CID, was so sure Sheila had killed her family that he ordered Jeremy's cousins out of his office when they asked him to consider whether Jeremy had set the whole thing up. The Daily Express reported on the 8th of August 1985, the day after the murders. A farming family affectionately dubbed the Archers was slaughtered in a bloodbath yesterday. Brandishing a gun taken from her father's collection, deranged divorcee Sheila Bamber, 28, first shot her twin 6-year-old sons. She gunned down her father as he tried to phone for help. Then she murdered her mother before turning the automatic .22 rifle on herself. The inquest into the murders was opened on the 14th of August 1985. The police gave evidence that the killings constituted a murder-suicide. Casson and the bodies were released. Neville, June and Sheila were cremated. The boys were buried. Jeremy's behaviour before and after the funeral increased suspicion among his family that he had been involved. They alleged that he sobbed during the funeral service for his parents and sister, and at one point seemed to buckle and had to be supported by Mugford, but that he was smiling and joking later at the wake. Shortly after the funerals, Jeremy travelled to Amsterdam with Mugford and a friend, where he bought a large quantity of cannabis. The travel agent who sold the tickets said the group had been in high spirits. Jeremy also began selling his family's belongings. Mugford's mother was offered June's car, and an ad was placed in a local newspaper asking £900 for Neville's. Just after his first arrest and release in September, Jeremy tried to sell 20 nude photographs of Sheila for £20,000 to the Sun and went on another overseas trip with a friend, this time to Saint-Tropez. A print from Sheila's right ring finger was found on the right side of the butt of the rifle, pointing downwards. A print from Jeremy's right forefinger was on the rear end of the barrel, above the stock and pointing across the gun. He said he had used the gun to shoot rabbits. There were 3 other prints that could not be identified. Jeremy's cousins returned to the farmhouse to search for the source of the red paint on the silencer. In the kitchen they found marks in the red paint on the underside of the mantelpiece, above an AGA cooker. A sample taken by a scenes of crime officer was found to contain the same 15 layers of paint and varnish that were in the paint flake found on the silencer. Casts of the marks on the mantelpiece were deemed consistent with the silencer having come into contact with the mantel several times. Mugford was initially supportive of Jeremy. Photographs of his, parents and Sheila's funeral show him weeping and hanging onto her arm. During an interview with the police on the day after the murders, she said that Jeremy had telephoned her at home in the early hours of the 7th of August, between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m, and said, "There's something wrong at home," and sounded worried. She said she had been tired and had not asked what was wrong. Mugford's position changed the following month after she'd had a series of rows with Jeremy. He seemed to want to end the relationship, and they had argued about his involvement in the murders. Mugford told Jeremy he was a psychopath and at one point tried to smother him with a pillow. During one argument, on the 4th of September, another woman telephoned Jeremy in Mugford's presence. As it became clear to Mugford that he had been seeing the woman, she smashed a mirror and slapped him. He then twisted her arm up her back. 3 days later, she went to the police and changed her statement. In the second statement, Mugford alleged that between July and October 1984, Jeremy had said he wished he could get rid of them all. He had talked disparagingly about his old father and mad mother, she claimed, who were trying to run his life. Jeremy was also alleged to have said that his sister had nothing to live for and that the twins were disturbed. The fact that the Bambers were paying for Sheila's expensive flat in Maida Vale annoyed him, she said. In discussions, she said she had dismissed as idle talk. Jeremy had talked about sedating his parents with sleeping pills, shooting them, then setting fire to the farmhouse. He reportedly said Sheila would make a good scapegoat. Mugford alleged he had discussed cycling along the back roads to the house, entering through the kitchen window because the catch was broken, and leaving it via a different window that latched when it was shut from the outside. A telephone call would be made from White House Farm to his home in Goldhanger, because the last phone call made would be recorded. Jeremy claimed to have killed rats with his bare hands to test whether he was able to kill, but he said it had taught him that he would not be able to kill his family, although he allegedly continued to talk about doing so. As a result of Mugford's statement, Jeremy was arrested on the 8th of September 1985, as was the friend Mugford said he had implicated, although the latter had a solid alibi and was released. Jeremy told police Mugford was lying because he had jilted her. He said he loved his parents and sister and denied that they had kept him short of money. He claimed the only reason he had broken into the caravan site with Mugford was to prove that security was poor. He further claimed he had occasionally gained entry to the farmhouse through a downstairs window and had used a knife to move the catches from the outside. He also claimed he had seen his parents' wills and that they had left the estate to be shared between him and Sheila. As for the rifle, Jeremy told police the gun was used mostly with the silencer off because it would otherwise not fit in its case. Charged on the 9th of September with breaking into the Osea Bay caravan site on the 25th of March 1985 and stealing £980, Jeremy was released on bail on 13 September, after which he went on holiday to Saint-Tropez with a friend. Shortly before this, he tried to sell his life story and nude photographs of Sheila to the Sun newspaper for £20,000. Before leaving England, Jeremy said that he returned to the farmhouse, gaining entry by the downstairs bathroom window. He claimed he did this because he had left his keys in London and needed papers from the house for the trip to France. He entered through the window, rather than borrow keys from the farm's housekeeper who lived nearby. When he returned to England on the 29th of September, Jeremy was arrested at Dover and charged with the murders. Jeremy's trial, which lasted 18 days, opened on the 3rd of October 1986 before Mr. Justice Drake and a jury of 7 men and 5 women at Chelmsford Crown Court. The prosecution was led by Anthony Arledge QC and the defence by Geoffrey Rivlin QC, supported by Ed Lawson QC. The Times wrote that Jeremy cut an arrogant figure in the witness box. At one point, when prosecutors accused him of lying, he replied, "That is what you have got to establish." The prosecution case was that Jeremy, motivated by hatred and greed, had left White House Farm around 10 p.m. on the 6th of August 1985, after dining with his family, to drive to his home in Goldhanger. Later, perhaps in the early hours of the morning of the 7th of August, he had returned to the farm on his mother's bicycle, which he had borrowed a few days earlier, cycling along a route that avoided the main roads and approaching the farmhouse from the back. He had entered the house through a downstairs bathroom window, taken the rifle with the silencer attached, and gone upstairs. He had shot June in her bed. She had managed to walk a few steps before collapsing and dying. He had shot Neville in the bedroom too, but Neville was able to get downstairs where he and Jeremy fought in the kitchen, before Jeremy shot him 4 times, twice in his temple and twice in the top of his head. He had shot Sheila in the main bedroom, next to her mother, and had shot the children in their beds as they slept. The prosecution further argued that Jeremy had not received a telephone call from his father, that Neville was too badly injured after the first shots to have spoken to anyone, that there was no blood on the kitchen phone that had been left off the hook, and that Neville would have called the police before calling Jeremy. They also argued that, had Jeremy really received such a call, he would have dialed 999, alerted the farm workers, then made his way quickly to White House, farm himself. The silencer played a central role in the prosecution's case. It was deemed to have been on the rifle when it was fired, because of the blood found inside it. The prosecution said the blood had come from Sheila's head when the silencer was pointed at her. Had she discovered that she could not shoot herself with the silencer attached, the court heard it would have been found next to her body. She had no reason to return it to the gun cupboard. That she had carried out the killings was further discounted because, it was argued, she had not recently expressed suicidal thoughts. The expert evidence was that she would not have harmed her children or father. She had no interest in or knowledge of guns. She lacked the strength to overcome her father, and there was no evidence on her clothes or body that she had moved around the crime scene or been involved in a struggle. In particular, her long fingernails had remained intact. The judge told the jury that there were 3 crucial points, in no particular order. Did they believe Mugford or Jeremy? Were they sure that Sheila was not the killer who then committed suicide? He said this question involved another. Was the second, fatal, shot fired at Sheila with the silencer on? If yes, she could not have fired it. Finally, did Neville call Jeremy in the middle of the night? If there was no such call, it undermined the entirety of Jeremy's story. The only reason he would have had to invent the phone call was that he was responsible for the murders. On the 28th of October, after deliberating for more than 9 hours, the jury found Jeremy guilty by a majority of 10-2, the minimum required for conviction. Sentencing him to 5 life terms, with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 25 years, the judge told Jeremy, "Your conduct in planning and carrying out the killing of 5 members of your family was evil, almost beyond belief." In December 1994, Home Secretary Michael Howard told Jeremy that he would remain in prison for the rest of his life, following a decision in 1988 by the Home Secretary of the day, Douglas Hurd,